Welcome to the Aliya Mathiesen Show. I'm your host, Aliya Mathiesen, and we are here every Wednesday at 6 p.m. Central Time. Merry Christmas to you guys. With Christmas right around the corner, we are really focusing in on Jesus and his birth and church. And this is the time where a lot of people start going to church, even if you don't go to church all year. So it's kind of crazy the times we're living in. This year, church has been really affected by the pandemic. The government has really made it difficult for churches to meet, especially larger churches. There's a lot of mandates regarding masks and social distancing. So if you're a mega church, you're probably going to have a difficult time social distancing. I think it's very important that we understand the church's role during something like this, where there's a lot of politics at play during the pandemic. And I've been wondering myself, where is the church? Where are the churches that are open? Why are churches so easily complying? We've kind of been seeing a split down the middle of people who are either we should obey the government completely because Romans 13, or we should civilly disobey because the emperor has no place in the church. So I think it was important to go out to the streets and ask people what their thoughts were on this topic. The government should ever be allowed to tell the church that they are allowed to be open or closed in a pandemic?
Wow.
I don't believe so.
Okay. Do you want to expand?
Well, just any place. I mean, we're not closing public schools or anything like that. Why would we close the churches?
I understand that people believe that there's something, can make you sick. So if they want to stay home, that's their choice. But if somebody wants to go out, I think that should be their choice as well.
Oh man, absolutely not. I think that as long as we follow all the safety guidelines, we should be able to do exactly what we want, because of course, like, we're able to go in and do restaurants, we're able to go in and do wineries, we're able to go in and enjoy like all of this stuff. So absolutely, like, as long as it follows all of these safety mandates and everyone feels safe and comfortable, we should be allowed to what we do, because it's America.
I'm going to go with no, they shouldn't be allowed to tell them whether they should be open or closed. But people still should use common sense as to whether they go to church or not and what they do. I know a lot of the churches have gone to virtual. And I think it's cool, and some people go to actually into the church, but some people stay home. So you've already limited your numbers. You can space people out, so probably no.
So in California, there was a big church, a mega church, and the government told them that they had to shut down because it was a mega church, and there's no way that they were going to be able to social distance. It's like 10,000 people, and they said, no, we're going to remain open, we're not going to wear masks, like, you have no business telling us what to do. Yeah. Do you think that the government should be able to tell them that in a case like that?
Again, I'm probably going to go with no, because I know why we came to America and how we established our Constitution. It was all because of the church is the reason that people came from England to America. And so, and to have freedom of religion. And that kind of extends part of freedom of religion. Now, do I think the church should have been going on? Probably not. Because I want people to be safe. I do. I don't want anybody to be a super spreader. But let people's better judgment and common sense prevail, hopefully. And you're just going to have to leave churches alone.
Church is important for people, and whatever belief you are. What's the difference of church, right? I mean, everybody associates church with Christianity, but there's a lot of churches, right? Mosques are churches, right? Buddhist temples are churches. So the government needs to stay out of that stuff, because everybody has their beliefs, and beliefs are important, and that's what keeps people, it gives people hope and faith, and you take that away from people, and they get depressed and start going down the wrong roads.
Before we jump into today's topic with our special guest, I really wanted to read the First Amendment together. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or of the right of the people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. Today, I wanted to invite a pastor out from Dallas. He's going to be FaceTiming me, and we're going to be talking about churches, civil disobedience, whether the churches should have opened or closed. His church has been open, I believe, this whole time. We're going to get into that. All right, welcome, Eugene Ralph. Thanks so much for being here today. What's the name of your church again?
Everlasting Redeemer Bible Fellowship.
Okay, awesome. And my first question to you is, did you ever close your church during the pandemic?
We did for a week or two here and there, but that was only because my wife came in contact with some people who had, it was sort of a second relational kind of a thing. We just out of precaution, we did that and we quarantined for that period of time, yes.
Okay, yeah. A lot of churches, I think every church pretty much, I don't know of a single church that stayed open the whole time just because we weren't sure at first, like what was going on. And then what made you decide to open again? Or was it pretty soon afterwards or?
Yeah, well, we only did it because we were, it was us, that we were being safe for other people, right? We weren't really concerned about ourselves. We've been tested. Well, I've not been tested. My wife has been tested numerous times because of her job, and she's never had it. So no, actually, I took the position that I would have only closed. We worship in a hotel, and if they would have told us that we couldn't have worship service there, obviously that would have caused a problem. But they were very accommodating, and they didn't give us a hassle at all. That was good. Yeah.
Yeah, Texas has been pretty good this whole time about making sure that we're able to worship, even though they have been putting some strict mandates on certain areas in Texas. But in places like California, we've seen it get hit pretty hard with some arbitrary measures of safety and like no singing in California. It's pretty wild.
It's the craziest thing I ever heard. Actually, here, the governor has never said that churches could not meet. But because of what he did do, he allowed the city governments to have undue authority, even though he claimed he was not giving it to them. He started giving it to them, sort of on the slide, and it created some problems. So at some point, he came out and he said that churches are essential, and then he told those guys to back off. And some of the county judges, they still try to impose their own rule on the churches, and it was really up to the churches at that point to do whatever they were going to do. And unfortunately, many churches chose to close their doors.
Yeah, it's gotten very confusing, I feel like, because the governor's saying one thing, like you don't have to wear masks in services. And then the mayor, for instance, and Mayor Adler in Austin saying you do have to wear it. So then, pastors who are trying to follow the law and be obedient, they're like, okay, what are our options? And I know a lot of churches are complying. What do you feel the Christian's duty is when it comes to civil disobedience in areas where it's not, if they're not asking us to sin? Because they're not saying we can't meet, at least here in Texas. In some places they are, but in Texas they're not saying we can't meet. But when it comes to adding all these kind of extra biblical mandates, like you have to wear a mask, you have to social distance, can't touch anybody, like what do you feel that Christians should do in that type of scenario?
In my opinion, this is totally unnatural. We're human beings. We are social creatures, and by nature, we are drawn to each other to embrace. That's understandable if someone has something that's obvious and you don't want to get close to them because you want to give them space and you want to protect yourself and them too. But we can make our own decisions. And you got to keep in mind that this nation was founded for the specific purpose of us being able to worship and worship freely to our God, or in cases of people who don't worship our God, to a God of their choosing. With as long as those decisions did not have a negative moral, and when I say moral, I mean negative impact on someone else, meaning it was not a life issue where it was actually sacrificing someone's life or something like that, or health. These things are, if you understand what's happening here, this is actually a spiritual war that's being waged, and it's caught the church up in it for the purpose of getting in the way of, for the purpose of advancing what they want to do. Because if they can get the church to shut down, then everything else is going to follow. And that's one of the most disturbing things that I've seen. I was actually pretty surprised initially when I checked and I saw even Grace Church closed for a couple of weeks. But, Pastor MacArthur, he preached to empty auditorium until people just decided, we're just going to come back, which I was glad to see that.
And for those of you who don't know, Grace Community Church is in Southern California in Sun Valley, and John MacArthur is the pastor there. There's been a lot of legal battles in California with Newsom, Yeah, it's pretty crazy over there.
Yeah, and I know I would find, I found that, I'm not the least bit surprised that he and Newsom are at it like this because, years ago I saw the interview where, he corrected Newsom in probably the not most glamorous way on Larry King because, Newsom, you know, Newsom had no idea what he was getting into when he went on an interview with John MacArthur and to say the stupid things he said when it comes, John MacArthur is not a political guy, but when you say stupid things relating to spiritual matters, you're going to be in some trouble. And that's pretty much where I am. There's a lot of things I can let go, but when it comes to spiritual matters, I can't let that go.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like when the pandemic first happened, it was always kind of my conviction that the church never should have shut down. And I felt very like abandoned by the church because it was like, we don't even have an option to go to church. Like there is literally nowhere for us to go, even if we wanted to. And not being in church for even a little bit of amount of time is not good for my spirit. I need to be in church all the time because my tolerance for people is like very small, especially right now.
I feel you. Yeah, I feel you on that. And actually, I felt the same way. And so I just always take the position that as the church, we are called to be those who lead in this area specifically, in our culture, in our world. And if we choose to shrink back and worry about these things that, that the Bible tells us that we are to trust our faith in God on, then what type of a testimony is that? How are we going to tell someone to fear not the unforeseen when we're fearing? We're acting in fear. That's crazy. It doesn't even line up with what we say we believe. So I was highly offended by the church for taking that position and for those church leaders who took those positions. And I understand the fear. I understand the concern. But my thing was, tell those who have those concerns, don't come to church. But we're going to be open because you got to think, what about all the people who don't go to church regularly? They are in a crisis is when the unchurched go to church, right? Think about 9/11. After 9/11, more people attended church than had done in a lot of years. Unfortunately, the church didn't seem to be ready to deal with the people coming there. And unfortunately didn't minister to a lot of them correctly, and they didn't keep coming, But the church is supposed to be there during the crisis, if nobody else is. And that's just the position I take. I believe that we have a responsibility, and that is, as far as I'm concerned, that's not an option. As a Christian, that's not an option. We have a responsibility to act out our faith in that way. And when it comes to if this is considered civil disobedience, then so be it. The government has no right, in my opinion, to tell us where we can, what we can, who we can worship, how we can worship, and any of that, especially in America. We have laws on the books specifically designed to deal with that. And the sad reality is most pastors that I've come across, they're not familiar with that understanding. And so that's where a lot of the breakdown happens.
Right. And it's causing a lot of disunity among the church because you have people who are, kind of going behind the Romans 13, like we should be obeying the government as long as they're not asking us to sin every single step of the way. Like they're not telling us we can't worship. So as long as we're doing it from home, or kind of misapplying Hebrews 10, like it doesn't really mean you have to meet in person as long as your like hard intentions are to meet, So it's definitely interesting. And I feel like it's causing a lot of division because you have believers on both sides of the spectrum who are like, love your neighbor, wear your mask. And then you have everyone else like, you have no idea where this is headed. And it's definitely causing a lot of disunity. Do you see that in your church, or do you think it's...
No, not in mine specifically, but I see what you're talking about. And I believe that what's happening is the wheat is being separated from the chaff. I believe that those who are the true believers are those who are going to show up and going to do what they're going to act on their faith. Those who are their faith is questionable, they're going to act on their lack of faith, and it's unfortunate. But you're going to do what you're going to do. I take the position also that if I can trust the Lord for my salvation, which is not yet coming, my salvation has come, but I mean my eternal salvation once I leave this life, I trust that based on my faith, I'm going to spend eternity with Him in heaven. but I'm concerned about a virus that has a very little chance of killing me. That just, even if it did, the reality is this: we have to live our lives. We can't walk around here afraid of our shadows and, walking around here paranoid, and, I'm amazed. I mean, what I come across is people in their 20s, especially the ones who are really buying into it. They are really freaked out. I mean, if they take off their mask, they will hurry up and run back, make sure they're at least 6 feet from you. And I'm like, okay, whatever floats your boat. But the reality is, and I don't push it when it's like that. I realize that they have that level of fear there. But if a person tells me they're a Christian, then I try to talk with them and help them understand that they need to really put their trust in God. The reality is, we have, in addition to the fact that we have the Lord that we can trust, we have something that can be considered a cure for this that we've always had, and it's called hydroxychloroquine, which the news media just went berserk once Trump announced that this stuff helps, helps the problem.
You're trying to get me censored, huh?
Yeah. And then, of course, the pharmacy industry, Big Pharma does not want that to get out, because they know that's billions of dollars they won't receive. So, when you look at it, it really is it's an agenda that's being pushed. It's my opinion, is born out of the pit of hell,
Right. Yeah. And Satan will use all kinds of excuses to attack the church. And where does it end? And that's the thing. It's like they keep moving the goalposts. First it was 2 weeks. Then it's, wear your mask all the time. And, that didn't work. Now we need the vaccine. And then, now there's a new strain. So the goalpost keeps getting moved. And it's like, at what point is the church allowed to meet? At what point is it allowed to be more than 10 people? If the government decides that, it becomes a very slippery slope, and then all of a sudden you're getting fined for meeting in your car. Like in Canada, that happened, I think 2 weeks ago, where they broke up a car service. So these aren't even people meeting in person. They're literally in their car, and they're getting fined like $32,000, that church, for meeting. So it's like, if we give the government that permission to dictate what we're allowed to do and what we're not allowed to do, then we're going to start seeing them take advantage of it, because, give anyone a little power and you're not going to get it back. So it's kind of crazy, because at a lot of these rallies, I've been to a lot of rallies this year, and it seems like a lot of people who are in the world who aren't even Christians, they seem to get it more than some of my Christian friends do. They're like, where is the church? Like, why aren't they open? This is like the time where everybody's afraid. Like, this is when people want to go to church, because they're afraid of death. And like, newsflash, I don't know if everyone knows this, but you're going to die eventually. I don't know if it's going to be from COVID, but your eternity is what matters right now. So whether you die from COVID or you get hit by a bus tomorrow, like, if you don't know the gospel, and if you don't have a relationship with Jesus, then it's irrelevant how long you can keep your life here on earth and hold on to your life here so hard that you literally stop living to do that,
Yeah, actually, I think that the virus offers those of us in the Christian community a tremendous opportunity to actually share the gospel. Because, there's a question that people ask from time to time that I talk to when they're just looking at everything that's happening, and they say, man, what is this world coming to? And I say, it's coming to an end. Are you ready? So, it's like, that's my little smart aleck comeback, But the thing is, it works, it causes people to think. And that's what we want to do. We want to provoke thought and cause people to consider what it is that they're believing in, whether or not it makes sense. So we can make those good decisions, help them make those good decisions. And I think that it's imperative that in a time like this is a crisis of magnanimous proportions, that we who are the church, we individuals, we're the church, but we are the corporate church as well. We need to demonstrate our faith and act upon what is we say we believe. And it is fortunate in a sense, and at least here in Texas, in some places, I've seen where churches are opening. Some are jumping through all types of hoops. Others are just having service, and they're telling people, if you want to wear a mask, wear a mask. If you don't want to wear a mask, don't wear a mask. And I can go with that. My thing is, I'm not a person who just wants to look for a fight. My thing is, leave me alone.
Right.
I'm
exactly.
fine. Just leave me alone. I'm coming here to worship And and I was talking with a friend of mine the other day, a Christian brother, that the church he's a member of, they require them to wear masks. But some friend of his who was a member of that church left and went to another church where they don't wear masks. And he was explaining his logic. By the way, he's also from California. He's been here longer than you, though. And so we were just talking about it, and I was just telling, sharing my logic with him. And I don't like wearing covers on my face unnecessarily. I mean, I realize there's sometimes you go into a situation you need to wear a mask, right? But in ordinary circumstances, we don't need to wear a mask. We went for several months. Hardly anybody was wearing masks, and we were fine. And the virus was not getting worse, And then all of a sudden, Fauci comes out and he says, well, I think we should wear a mask. And people say, well, why did you tell us we didn't have to wear a mask? Did you remember what his answer was?
Well, we lied to you so that all the healthcare workers could get it.
Exactly. So if you lied to me once, why should I believe you're telling me the truth now? See, that's what I say. It's all part of an agenda. These people are purely wicked. And I use that term very specifically because when it comes to Dr. Fauci, when it comes to Bill Gates, and some of these other people that's in these upper echelon individuals and what they're up to, they believe in population control. And that's what I've been sharing with people, trying to get them to see, because if you look at what the United Nations goal is, they have it written on some stone in some place. I forgot what city. I think it's somewhere in Georgia. They have this big, some big plaque, like stone plaque they created some years ago. And on that stone, they said that their goal is to reduce the world's population below 500 million. So,
Sounds
I mean, we
about
have
right.
to kill 7.5 billion people we have to kill, right? So, I mean, if, the thing is, if you really want to let your mind run as to if someone really wanted to screw things up in the world, they know they have to screw it up in the United States, right? What could what would they do? Well, this is probably one of the ideas they would do to come up with. And that's the reason why so many people believe it is a conspiracy, that it wasn't just something that happened organically. Could have happened organically. I don't know. I do know that, at least I believe that a lot of what I see happening in the world, especially coming from the United States when it comes to morality, the Lord is not pleased with. And sometimes he allows things to happen in order to get our attention, in order to cause us to make correction. And so this might be it.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I mean, I feel like a lot of the times when you talk about these things, people are quick to label you a conspiracy theorist, which I find very ironic because the Bible preaches that we're totally depraved, like to our core. So it's like not very shocking when people in the world do sinful acts and wicked acts, because it's like that's our hearts. That's where we would be if it wasn't for Jesus. So it's not shocking that people have ulterior motives to their evil ways, or that they will even take advantage of a crisis, even if they didn't cause the crisis, So it's not really conspiracy. It's just a fact that we're wicked
the
and
thing about it,
do wicked things.
when somebody tells me that, first thing I ask them, I say, well, if you define what a conspiracy is, a conspiracy is two or more people getting together to come up with a scheme that is not good for the majority of people, but only for them, right? That's a conspiracy itself. The theory is whether or not it can be proven.
Right. That's a good point.
So at this point, I don't think it might be a conspiracy, but it's not a theory. That's the reason why I call it a part of an agenda, because if you see it as a part of an agenda, it's easier to help people to connect the dots, because so many people, I understand it to a degree, but for the most part, they do not want to be labeled a conspiracy theorist, because got some real wackos out there. But the bottom line is, this is not about a conspiracy. This is about an agenda, a very wicked agenda that is born out of the pit of hell. And I think that if you look at it from a spiritual context, not purely, but just in part, it's very easy to see that this is the work of the devil. This is, if you could say, germs happen, things happen, nature of man, because of sin, we have things happen, right? Okay, fine. Yes, that part is true, but the response to it is not. The response is purely the work of the devil, okay? Yeah. You do not shut down your economy ever for any reason. You let it go on and things happen, and you might have to make adjustments as you go. You do not shut it down. When you shut down your economy, you cause people to not be able to provide for themselves and their families. And that doesn't mean that's irrelevant whether you have a business or not, whether you are an employee or employer. The bottom line is you have to work in order to provide for yourself. You have to have a means of doing that.
And that's
And when you
biblical.
that's right. And you take that away from people. Now what you're doing is you're saying, okay, well, if you die, that's okay. I'm listening that all of this foolishness about this stimulus package that they've, been ongoing. I mean, the reality is, no matter how much money they spend, it's never going to be enough to offset the damage that's been done, or even in the beginning, it wasn't enough to help to offset the damage that was being done way back when. So here we are, 8, 9 months into this thing, and we're talking as if this thing started yesterday, and people have lost their businesses. I drive down I-35 sometimes going to Austin, and it breaks my heart when I look to the side of the road when I'm going through these little towns, and malls, big, huge strip malls that used to be open and vibrant, all shuttered and boarded up in some cases and just totally abandoned, and for sale signs everywhere. These are little towns. People's livelihoods are connected to that in some way. It's just, it's almost indescribable, honestly. I can't imagine what that's like to have that. And the governor of Texas, whereas he might be better than Newsom, but honestly, that's not saying much.
Yeah, it's true. And so this whole Romans 13 argument, let's kind of dive into that, because that's a huge argument I hear from Christians, even outside of just church, like even going out in the street, like I have to wear the mask because the government tells me I have to. Like, I don't like it, but I have to because they're not asking me to sin. What do you say to that?
If they're not a Christian, I don't allow them to quote scripture to me, first of all. Okay, first I tell them, I said, so the government tells you you're not supposed to speed in your car, and you're telling me you don't do that either. Okay, so so basically, don't try to quote scripture to me if you're not a Christian. But for those who are Christians, I'm a little arrogant when it comes to that, because I've dealt with my share of that foolishness. I don't tolerate it. For those who are Christians, what I tell them is that Romans 13 also says that those who are in government are ministers of God. Okay, now granted, many of those ministers are evil and they do evil things. But in America, we're unique. And along with the fact that we're supposed to submit, you ask yourself the question, who are those ministers of God supposed to submit to? They're supposed to submit to the constitutional oath that every last one of those people took to protect our nation from enemies, foreign and domestic, both foreign and domestic. So when they raise their hand, regardless of whether they're a heathen or a believer, and they put their other hand on the Bible and say that I swear to defend the United States of America, or the state of Texas, in this case, against all enemies, both foreign and domestic, they're basically saying I submit to this document. Okay, that's the reason why it was written. It was written that they would submit to the document. So when we in America are talking about who's the ultimate authority as far as this nation is concerned, it's not the people that we elect, but it's actually the Constitution, because they also submit themselves. They swear an oath to submit themselves to the Constitution, right? So when we take the conversation, put it in that context, considering, we can take this Romans 13 thing however you want, but the reality is, first of all, that's the correct understanding. And somebody brought that to my attention, a minister, probably about 15 years ago, which I thought was pretty awesome. And I realized some people might think that's a little biased, and it is. But the reality is, that's the truth. They take an oath to submit themselves to the Constitution. I was listening to Rush Limbaugh just a couple of days ago when he was on the air, and he said that he is surprised that, considering how rambunctious many of these elected officials are, that they actually submit to this document in any way, because it can't enforce itself. It has to have someone to enforce its law, right? But people do it. And I believe that is because in and of itself, this is a spiritual document. You think about how the founders came together to create the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. They prayed for weeks in some cases to ask the Lord for guidance on how they should put this thing together. In out of well, I think it was like 55, I think it was, of the people that signed the Declaration of Independence. I mean, in the Constitution, all of these guys coming together. The thing is, when we think about how this whole process came together and got started, this was a spiritual act. This was not purely a physical or a natural act. This is unnatural in almost every possible way you can imagine. So when people tell me something about Romans 13 and submitting to the government, most of the time, unless they are a minister, I don't engage that conversation. I normally dominate it, because most of the time they don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of them. I mean, America was literally born out of civil disobedience, coming from Europe, right. And that's why they left, because they were civilly disobeying the government who was telling them they couldn't preach the gospel, and so they said, "We're going to go to America and write our own constitution."
I mean, and it wasn't even called America; it's just new place across the seas that somebody discovered. They hadn't named it, So my whole point is that, okay, people can say what they want. And my thing is, most of the people that say those things, what I found is they're hypocrites in some form or fashion.
That's a good point too, because I have friends who are like, you have to do this, you're not obeying the government, but then, they're hanging out with their friends on the side and, doing other stuff that the government said they can't, but they're really good at church. It's like, you can't pick and choose which rules you want to follow. Like, either you have to follow all of it to a T, or you don't follow any of it, or you pick and choose. I mean,
and think about it. So I am going to not worship corporately with my brothers and sisters in Christ. I'm not going to worship God, but I'm going to do everything else. Right? Come on, this doesn't.
Priorities.
Yeah.
And then people forget that when you keep reading Romans 13, like, it goes on to talk about how you shouldn't be afraid of the government when you're doing good, because they don't correct good behavior. So the government's there to enforce good behavior. It's not there to hurt people who are just making a living or breathing the air.
Well, it depends on the government. You can't, I mean, in all honesty, even when Paul wrote that was not 100% true about that government. It is the way it happens in dictatorships, monarchies. Most of the time, if you're someone that's not causing them any trouble, they don't cause you any trouble, right? They don't typically random just, in the last, I'm quite sure it was times where it happened where, you got these really brutal dictators. They just randomly go out and kill people and cause all kinds of mayhem. So although the purpose of government was for those things you mentioned, mm-hmm. The truth of the matter is most governments and humankind has not measured measured up to that standard. And the reality is, American government is one of the few that's come close to it for a period of time. And I mean, we've had our shortcomings. No, it's no doubt about that. But all in all, we are probably one of the ones that's closest to measuring up to that standard. So they make a good point when they say that those things about the government, enforcing, helping to enforce good things and, be the deterrent for bad things. That's what it's supposed to do. But we see pretty much being turned on its head right now. And it's been being turned on its head for some time in different places in America more than others. But now it's like all bets are off. If you look at it carefully, you can say that if you look at Romans 1 and you can see how the Lord talks about when those who call good things bad and bad things good, we see those things happening right now more and more all the time. So, once again, those people who delve into Romans 13, some of them are, in my opinion, they are well-meaning, and I understand that, and they have the desire to do the right thing, but it's an opportunity, I believe, for us, for when they present us with that, is for us to have a real conversation with them and help them understand what Romans 13 is truly saying and how that applies here in this country. God's law applies basically the same everywhere. It's not to say that, have a special carve out, okay? But considering how our Constitution was written in order for that to work here, we have a unique, I consider it an opportunity if we take advantage of it, right? But if you don't take advantage of the opportunity, eventually it goes away. And that's what we see happening right now.
Yeah, and speaking of taking advantage of, like, do you think Christians should be more involved in politics? Because I see a lot of Christians saying, like, my job is to preach the gospel. That's it. And they're kind of like, nothing else matters as long as I get the gospel out there. And for me, I've always had a difficult time with that because I'm such a justice person. And I'm like, but there's so many like things that going on, like, have abortion and all these agendas being shoved towards the church. And I feel like the church doesn't show up to legislative meetings. They don't really take an active part a lot of the times in politics, and kind of stopping the agendas coming towards them that will eventually take away their liberties. So do you think that there's a case for people who say that, or do you believe that Christians should be involved?
No, I believe that Christians should be involved in every aspect of life that they possibly can. What is that, 2 Timothy 3:16, Paul writes, he said, all scripture is given for reproof, correction, and then he gives a whole list of different things that what scripture is for. And so, when people tell me something like that, like I say, I'm a little bit of a smart aleck. I'll say, so tell me, what does all exclude?
Mm-hmm.
Because, in other words, we serve a God who created this world and created us in it and gave us a mandate of what we're supposed to do in it, specifically for those who are his, right? So tell me, what does that exclude? Now, granted, we might have our personal limitations because, we're incapable of some things because of circumstances or whatever. And I understand that. But we shouldn't place limits on ourselves that are undue, just because I want to cop out. And I think that's just the reality. Look, history is a very important thing to know. And the reality is, prior to the 60s, there was, I think it was 67, prior to 1967, there were standards in the movie industry that caused them to be very restrictive on the type of movies they made for certain types of people, especially, what they call smut, okay? And that was porn, whatever. And that was shunned by the vast majority of people. But they removed that in 1967. And then if you look at the timeline, you see how from that time, television and everything that was made started slowly going down, right? And here we are today, 50 years later. So my point is, when Christians, those who are the Lord's, pull back from aspects of society, it creates a vacuum. And nature abhors a vacuum, and Satan will move in. The Holy Spirit working through us uses us as the vessels to accomplish the will of God. When we're not there, there's no vessel. So the devil has a free reign, and he just runs rampant. It's not to say that we're always going to be successful. We could sometimes just be the restrainer. Often it requires that we are there as a voice of reason, a voice of common sense, and a voice of honesty, calling these people out. A person can be amazed what they can accomplish sometimes, not believing they will make any difference talking to an elected official when they present them with something and you're just following the Lord's lead. The Lord can convict their heart, cause their heart to change. The Lord can cause them to be nervous. The Holy Spirit just gets in there and just messes up their head, right? But if you're not the vessel being used, that's not going to happen. So, no, there's a responsibility, that I share with people. The things we do is not an option. It's a responsibility. And if we understand that, it makes all the difference in the world.
And Christians, I think, confuse, like they always say, well, I'm not interested in politics, or I don't want to talk politics, but it's not really politics anymore at this point. Like when we're talking about murdering babies in the womb, like that's not political, that's moral. And I feel like we've turned a lot of these moral issues that used to just be black and white, this is wrong, into, oh, well, it's more nuanced than we think, or, oh, it's not really this, or the science shows that now there are 78 genders. And, you know, we've kind of justified all of these things that we once knew were not true, that were wrong, that were immoral, and we are now saying, oh, this is just politics. And I think that couldn't be further from the truth. So what would you say, kind of to wrap up, for people who are trying to find a solid church right now, who are maybe in areas where there aren't a lot of churches open, or they have to do virtual meeting, what would you say to those people to kind of encourage them?
I would say, first of all, get a good Bible and read it. And after you read it, go back and study what you read. Pray and ask the Lord for guidance, and plug into the ones that are online until you can actually find one that's gonna suit you and fit you well. I realize it's going to be more of a challenge right now, depending on where you live. But there are good churches out there where they're actually teaching the word. And I encourage people to find a church that actually teaches the word. A church that preaches and entertains you, even with good music. All that's fine, but you need a place where you can grow, and where it's going to feed your spirit, where the people who are leading that ministry care about your spiritual condition, and they care about, as well as the rest of your life, they care about your spiritual condition more than anything. Because, you know, when you think about what the Lord said in the book of Jude, he says, I would that you prosper as your soul prospers. You know, the Lord wants us to grow closer to him. Our goal, our duty as a Christian, is to always be walking in a way that he pleases, but also to be growing and getting closer to him in relationship. That can only happen when we spend time with him. So I would just, encourage people to be diligent about it. The reality is, if Christians together, and let's say, because all the churches nearby you are closed, or, requiring things that are, more than what you're willing to tolerate, you might have to drive an hour, to find a good place to go. But, you probably drive an hour to work. You probably drive an hour to go to certain shopping malls. I mean, the reality is, yes, it's a little bit of a sacrifice. But the reality is, as far as your spiritual condition is concerned and spiritual benefit, it's probably going to be worth it. So, and then maybe you can get with a group of people that and you can start having your own services, And I'm sure that out of that will come someone who's going to be qualified as a leader to help to shepherd that flock until, you can find a place that's suitable, or maybe start a new church. The reality is, where there's a will, there's a way. It's
very true. Thank you so much for coming on. I always enjoy talking to you, and we're very like-minded. It's always a pleasure. For everyone else who was listening in, thank you guys for tuning in. Again, we're here every Wednesday at 6 p.m. Central. Tune in next week on Wednesdays, and we'll see you on the next one.